I have a little notes page on my phone. Every time I hear something, I write it down. And you're going to internally drown this client if they actually do this.
As personal trainers, we are not equipped to give people nutrition advice.
As I always say, we're very knowledge rich, but we're practitioner poor. 22-year-old personal trainer speaking with a 55-year-old woman. A player's not there with the scales and putting his plate on it and measuring out each portion of every single dish. 1 in 10 supplements that sit on a supermarket shelf have contaminants and prohibited substances that would get an athlete banned from sport. And actually all they were eating was expensive Haribos. Rip up every nutrition plan you've ever wrote as a PT, first and foremost. Yeah.
The problem is not the diet plan. The problem is following it. Thanks for doing this, Dan. Really appreciate it.
No worries,
and it's been ages. I mean, obviously, we've been speaking for years now. And, whenever I need some advice on nutrition, you're the first person I call. And I think you've done, first of all, congratulations for doing, for being able to grow your business and, to this extent. And as we were speaking earlier, I think your business has skyrocketed from the first time we met. I met a young boy that time and you were trying to build your business. And I think one of the things I did notice, and I think I must say this, is, and I've always said this to you, I'm happy to do anything to, for your business because you genuinely know what you're talking about. There are very few people who know their shit and you know your shit and you can also find out when somebody's giving bullshit. So I think that's very important. So I think you've done extremely well. And I think one thing I've done a good service to the fitness industry is I got you introduced to the fitness industry. And every time I see you speaking at your PT, I say, you know what? When I first met Dan, I said, you should be speaking to the personal trainers. I think a lot of personal trainers who've heard you, and I've been in the audience to listen to what people said. And then you got 2 personal trainers talking and say, yeah, see, that's what I was fucking saying. So then they know there is value to what you say. And one thing that stands out, about you for me, and the reason we clicked on really well, is you try to simplify and demystify nutrition. You don't make it out to be very complicated while it is. And like we always say, it's like a fucking minefield, right? But then for a normal bloke, for a personal trainer, or even for somebody who's an end consumer, how do you make nutrition accessible in a way where they can use it for their lives? Because a lot of times there's so much information that, you kind of get confused as to what you're doing. So I think today is going to be a lot around, while you do extremely high-end nutrition work for, Leeds United, you do for different, I think you do it for Lancashire, I always get this wrong.
Leicestershire
Cricket, you do it for Leicestershire Cricket, England cycling. So you got some big marquee names under your belt and you're doing some great stuff. But what I want to do today is to touch upon how can we use your expertise so I'm trying to represent the fitness industry and say, how can we use your expertise, somebody like you who's working with the elite athletes, to work with our trainers, to work with the industry and to, get people going and understanding nutrition better, educating them well. So that was the idea of getting you again on the podcast. And I'm going to definitely, like you spoke, I'm going to definitely get on the old clips out.
Oh, 100%.
We were in a fucking balcony sitting. There was an England touch, right? And
yes.
Where was this, man?
In Nottingham, all the way back in Nottingham. Yeah.
Oh, fuck. It's been years, like 3-4 years now.
All right, and the rest probably, I reckon 4, maybe even 5 years now.
Fuck, man. Yeah, it's been ages. So thanks again for coming on, Dan, and taking out time. I know you're a fucking business. You're a really, really busy guy now. And I'm very happy for that.
Oh, thank you, Samir, for having me on. And I'm looking forward to getting into everything about nutrition. And I think, my passion stems from when I was younger. And you mentioned there, and it resonated with me about like simplifying it for everybody, not just the elite athletes, the general people of the general population that personal trainers work with. And all of that for me just comes from like the journey I've had as a young kid into now what I do now, which is, performance nutritionist to some of the most elite athletes in the world.
Your own background, Dan, you played rugby at a high level. So, I'm sure you've had your own challenges with nutrition initially. How did you end up becoming a nutritionist? What happened? You were playing rugby. How did you get into nutrition?
Yeah, so played a bit of rugby league, obviously from Yorkshire, have to play rugby league. Yeah. You probably know the rugby union, which is the bigger sport, but really enjoyed it as a kid. Didn't think I'd ever actually amount to any decent level of a player. And to be honest, I didn't, hence why I ended up being a nutritionist. So I think my journey really started young in terms of like understanding nutrition. There wasn't as much in terms of social media out there. Like, I'm not that old, I'm only 29, but reels weren't a thing, TikTok wasn't a thing. We were getting information off forums still, and there's these 40-year-old bodybuilders trying to tell rugby players how to eat with no research or backing. And that really led me into that deep curiosity, not just around nutrition, but around sports science. And once I got to 18, I had a bit of an option to make. Do I try and continue to pursue this somewhat failing career as a rugby player, or do I go off to university and study, sports science, sports nutrition, physiology, all of that kind of stuff, and better understand me really from a selfish point of view as a rugby player? But actually what ended up happening was I kind of moved away from that rugby sphere of playing. And actually that was one of my first roles out of university, was working with rugby players at a Super League club, so a rugby league professional club, full-time as their nutritionist. And realistically for me, that was like my childhood dream, like vicariously living through the rugby players themselves, giving them the nutrition advice. And I think there was times where I was stood on the side of the pitch watching the game, in the back of my head thinking I was on that pitch playing, or at least playing a part, where actually, it was probably a very small 1% part I was playing with the nutrition. However, it certainly was a dream that I ticked off early in my career, which then obviously then spiraled into what we're doing today.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I always feel is unless you've done it yourself, you don't know it. So when you're playing as an elite athlete yourself, when you're playing as an athlete, you understand the constraints you've got, and you always mention this. One thing you always say is simplify, right? Rather than, I think a lot of times people have to overcomplicate things to show that they have some value. But people who believe in themselves try to simplify things. They say it's not complicated. So the best doctors you go to, I have a pain in the left knee, and I was in India recently, and sometimes you go to doctors and they will just blurt out words that you can't understand. And then I went to this really nice doctor with a lot of experience, and he explained to me in this is very simply put together, A, B, C, that's it. And it was like, said, what the fuck, man, what have the other fuckers been telling me? Because I don't need to know that. I don't need to know that. If I am buying a car, how did you make the fucking engine is not my concern.
How fast it goes.
I just need the basic fundamentals, dude. Yeah. I drive the car. I don't fucking build the car. Yeah. So don't tell me that it was complicated to build the car, because that's not going to impact my driving. You don't teach that in driving lessons, do you? So I think that's the analogy I always use. People try to overcomplicate things. Yes, nutrition is complicated, but it should not be for the end consumer. Absolutely. So I know you train a lot in the gym as well. Tell me what's happening on the gym floor now. What are the personal trainers saying?
I love how you've dropped this in, because we were having a little conversation around it, because I brought it up at Perform X. So when I was delivering on the stage, there's something I like to do when I go to the gym, and I go to a nice gym, which ultimately has some good quality personal trainers, but not necessarily good quality nutritionists. And I tend to leave headphones in, and we'll train, as I do around the gym, but occasionally we'll be near a personal trainer over the days, the weeks, the months that I'm training, and I'll overhear conversations. And some of them I almost intervene, and then I remember that I'm not sat in a professional sports kit that I can then go and kind of have that conversation. I'm just in my normal gym gear, probably quite sweaty and red in the face from doing the session, and need to make sure that I'm staying away from that kind of work element. I'm there to enjoy the gym, not work. But I hear all kinds of things. The classic ones that I've heard recently, and I have a little notes page on my phone. Every time I hear something, I write it down, was 1,000 calorie diets. So just blanket approach, no real evidence or research, just turning around to pretty much every other one of their clients and saying, yeah, we need to drop you to 1,000 calories, and just making that the goal number. If we do that for 2 weeks, you'll drop all the fat, you'll drop all the weight, and then you can go back to eating as normal. And I'm like, one, you're encouraging yo-yo dieting, and two, that's quite dangerous, because you're not even getting to the BMR, so the basal metabolic rate of nutrition there. So we're not even just supporting day-to-day living and energy. And when we factor in that they're trying to exercise as well, that's going to have an impact on their performance. Another one that I heard more earlier in the year, was the January Classic 75 Hard. Somebody trying to tell, a client that they're not drinking enough water because 4 litres isn't enough. It needs to be 6 or 8. And I'm there thinking, you're going to internally drown this client if they actually do this. It's a genuine fear and concern that you should have. In winter months when it's cold, the sweat rates aren't nowhere near as high. Yeah. And ultimately, you're going to potentially risk, kind of any kind of illness or injury from doing that. And I think the final one that made me laugh, and it wasn't actually the client who was telling to do this, but it was kind of this like, leading by example quote. And he was like, yeah, whenever I go out for meals with my friends, I always take my meal prep with me. And I see if they can oven it or heat it up for me, because I can't eat what's on the restaurant menu because I don't know the calories. And I'm like, you're instilling those values then into your client and making that the norm, where I think we've got to really pull away from all of this kind of jargon and rubbish, and you like to use a swear word on here, but bullshit that we get in the nutrition industry or in the fitness industry with nutrition. And for me, I don't think it's from a lack of trying. When you hear these personal trainers talking about nutrition, all they're trying to do is help. Yeah. But as I always say, we're very knowledge rich, but we're practical or practitioner poor. So we're good at having all this knowledge and all of our own lived experiences. Me as a rugby player, I still drive on some of them when I'm working with athletes and clients and talking to them about what I did and where I went wrong or where I went right as a young athlete and how that can ultimately help an athlete going forward in the future. But I always back that up with research, whereas I think a lot of personal trainers will find stuff that works specifically for them. And they might be a 22-year-old personal trainer speaking with a 55-year-old woman, and they're trying to instill the same values of nutrition onto somebody that's got a full-time job, 3 kids, extracurricular activities outside of the gym, outside of work, and also maybe wants a social life. And they're trying to say, okay, you only got 1,000 calories. And all of a sudden they're picking up a bottle of wine on a Saturday and going, hang on a minute, that's 400 calories of my day. So I can only have 2.5 bottles of wine and no food today. Okay, I'll track that in my fitness pal. It's a scary world to me at the minute. And I think something needs to change within that industry.
Yeah, I think we are, how do I say it without fucking, sounding like a fucking complete dickhead? I think as an industry, we as personal trainers, we are not equipped to give people nutrition advice, first of all. Secondly, we try to cut corners, because what we're doing is we don't want to take up that course or CPD on nutrition. We don't want to become a nutritionist, but we still want to give nutrition because we feel people won't go to a nutritionist. And then you sometimes feel that if I recommend them to a nutritionist, I may lose the client. So there's too much of conflict of interest here, and I think I'm not saying all personal trainers, but I'm just saying that, if you can make this simple, right? And I don't think it needs to be very complicated for people, right? It just, but like you said, these fads that come along, these fucking just random shit that comes in. The other thing, like you spoke about, very, very important, is you have to give people diets that are sustainable, right? And aligned to your lifestyle. 22-year-old getting into the gym as a coach and then within 3 months becomes a life coach. You're not even fucking seeing life. Right? How can you become a life coach and mentor and all sorts of designations flying around here and there? Because you're self-employed, you can market and say whatever the fucking shit you want to do. Yes. So that becomes a problem. Now, one thing I have noticed about all your, whenever you present, you talk about something which I love. You say food first. Yes. Right? The food first approach is, and I remember the first conversation when we had, and you said, I was going on like an idiot. I was talking to you about a lot of supplements, and you says, no, keep all the fucking supplements aside. Let's take a food first approach. That was the first conversation you and I had almost 5 years back. And so tell me, what is it food first approach for people? Like, how do we incorporate this in our life? How do personal trainers use this for their benefit? Because you do speak to a lot of personal trainers. I think you're part of Level Up with your PT, when you go and speak with trainers, and I'm sure you got feedback on this. So what's the food first approach, and how do people incorporate it? How do personal trainers incorporate it?
Yeah, I think the food first approach can be as simple as you want to make it. Ultimately, taking the 2 words, food first, means that everything and every action around nutrition, we think food first. So we never try to supplement before we need to. And there needs to be a needs analysis done on every single individual client to make sure that they know where they can get certain macro or micronutrients from foods before we start even trying to look into supplements. I think the supplement industry, of course, is a huge blame of this kind of notion of that food first isn't the best approach, and that actually most people need to be supplementing, and why aren't we supplementing? And we should be having all of these different
is there something that we definitely need to be supplemented? Do you think there's something that's around in our diets at the moment where, like, I know example, minerals and vitamins, maybe. Yeah. But is there something else that we need to, like, from a macro perspective, is there something we really need?
Yeah, so the way I approach it is there's a really good paper called Food First but Not Food Only by Professor Graham Close and his team. And essentially they make a decision matrix around supplements and using supplements. Now, this is mainly designed for the elite athlete, which I completely understand. Most people listening to this podcast won't be elite athletes. However, everything that the elite athlete world does tends to be best practice to some extent. So we can start bringing some of that kind of knowledge into the general population. And effectively what we need to do is work through this matrix. So the first protocol is to work out whether what we're discussing or what we want is actually a supplement. So that's step number one. And I'm going to simplify these steps. I might miss a couple just for the purpose of the podcast. But step one is identify if it's actually a supplement. A great example of this is I get people coming up to me, personal trainers, saying, oh, I'm prescribing a supplement of Red Bull or other energy drinks. Because it's a supplement, right? Because it's got caffeine in it. It's like, no, it's a food and beverage product. It's not a supplement. Whereas a caffeine gum or a caffeine shot or something that's made specifically for performance would be considered a supplement. Now, don't get me wrong. There's still a grey area as to whether, a sports drink is a supplement, because if you buy it powderized and add water to it, it's considered a supplement. If you buy it pre-bottled, like a Lucozade or a Gatorade, it's not necessarily a supplement. So first we need to establish that. The second one we need to actually establish, is it proven to support specific performance or our health? So there's health and there's performance. Something like a sports drink might improve performance, but not necessarily health. Something like a vitamin and mineral, as you were speaking about, may improve health. The next one down is then the food first question is, can I get this specific nutrient from foods instead of supplements? So the one I always get to this stage in the decision matrix is talking around protein. Most individuals don't need the 2.2 grams per kilograms that we prescribe to rugby players to consume. But if I'm working with a 120 kilogram rugby player that needs 2.2 grams per kilogram of protein per day, it's going to be very hard to get that through foods. There's going to be a lot of volume. So that's where we might
unless you're fucking chasing chicken every day in the morning.
Whole chicken for breakfast, lunch and dinner. So that's where we might drop that one in. Actually, yes, that's a yes. So again, we work our way through this decision tree, and at any point do we get to know it's don't use the product. The ones that make it all the way through, so again, is it actually a supplement? Is it proven to support our health or specific performance? Can we get it through our foods? And then for athletes, the extra layer is like, have we checked for prohibited substances against our sport? Have we checked that it's tested and safe via a regulatory body? Once we get to yes, it's not, once we go yes through all them, it's not then an absolute yes at the bottom. It's consider the product. So ones that maybe fall through that, as you originally asked, would be something like a creatine.
Correct.
Or a vitamin D in the winter months. Because in the UK, especially Manchester where we're filming this, there's never any sunlight. So we can only really get around 20% of our total daily vitamin D through through foods. The rest of it, 80% of it comes through foods or supplementation. So ultimately, we struggle there. I've got the percentages the wrong way around there. So I'll re-say that 20% through foods, 80% through sunlight. So again, we're going to struggle to get that 80% through sunlight. So we may need to supplement vitamin D. Similarly with creatine, it's having its moment at the minute in the research. It's a product that we're realising is useful for everybody.
Correct.
When we're looking at trying to get, let's just say 5 grams of creatine in per day, we're looking at around 2.5 kilograms of salmon, give or take, to get that amount of creatine in, which I can't imagine anybody, even some of the worst personal trainers I've heard talk about nutrition, are prescribing 2.5 kilograms of salmon to an individual to get the creatine in for a food first approach. So there are nuances to it. I don't think we can always be food first, but it's food first, but not food only. In certain circumstances, when we've gone through a decision matrix, when we've made those key steps towards actually assessing whether we need a product, not just because you've seen the advert 5 times on Facebook and you're drawn into buying some specific electrolytes or BCAAs or protein powders.
Don't even fucking get that, man. BCAA is a fucking... I don't even know why people take them.
Yeah.
It's
they're still going around and people are still producing new ones. And I'm like, if you're eating enough protein in the day, complete protein, there's no rationale as to why we need it. It's just expensive flavored water. That's all you're really gaining from it. And that's where it really pains me when I hear people have gone to, a supplement company and bought like a supplement stack, like a health stack, And it's like, well, first of all, that multivitamin, as long as you're eating 5 or more fruit and veg a day, we don't need the multivitamin. Secondly, just because you've got a high carb, high protein, whey protein powder, if you're getting that through foods and snacks, we definitely don't need to be using it. And then there's maybe like 1 or 2 that maybe they've got like a magnesium biglycinate, which is good for sleep, and they're struggling with sleep. That might be something that take that one. But you spent £150 just to have one usable product within this bundle or stack that companies are selling.
Yeah, and you said something very, very important, and I think that's the root cause of it. The root cause of it is we're seeing too many supplements trying to solve problems that people have. So what you're doing is you're targeting somebody for a problem they're trying to solve for themselves and giving them a shortcut. Like human beings tend to take the path of least resistance. Yes. So when you tell somebody, dude, you can have this and you're going to grow muscle, I'm going to fucking have it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the communication bit of it. How do we get people into the habit of using whole food more than this? Is by them to understand that it's equally good, if not better.
Yeah.
And it comes with multiple benefits. So you spoke about creatine monohydrate. You and I have spoken about it a lot of times. Tell me more about, what's creatine monohydrate? What does it do for you? Who should be taking it? How good is it for somebody who goes to the gym?
Yeah. So initially, creatine years ago was seen as a performance product.
Yeah.
So it was good for explosive movements, endurance, power, strength, increasing muscle mass, all of those general properties that you'd associate with an athlete. I'm really fortunate to be good friends with who's known on Instagram as the Creatine OG, Steve Jennings, and his story is amazing. So 1992 Barcelona Olympics, they snuck in creatine as a supplement because they didn't want any of the other Olympic teams knowing about it. So specifically for Team GB. And don't get me wrong, there might have been a direct correlation, or Team GB were just good at the time, but we won a lot of medals from doing that. And Steve's been on, a over 30-year journey around looking at the efficacy and the effectiveness of creatine, not just in elite athletes. And some of the stuff that, himself talks about, and also some of the, I suppose, the really well-respected researchers around those areas speak about, is now looking at this kind of overall health and supportive aspect. So, it can help with weight maintenance. It can help with preserving muscle mass in the elderly. There is some early suggestions in the research that can help with cognitive function. It can help with kind of reducing brain fog, which then can have a positive effect on people's mental health and people's, mindset and productivity. So it's not just a tool that makes you get bigger biceps anymore or makes you run a little bit faster. It's something that can be this wraparound kind of support for health. But the biggest challenge and the arguments that I have is that it's almost, who is it for? So not necessarily what does it do for everybody, but who's it mainly for? So one of the big things that I talk in schools a lot, I talk with youth athletes, and there's a lot more research coming out in the youth sports sphere of research that creatine is actually beneficial for youth athletes. And that is something that's quite a bit of pill to swallow for a lot of parents and coaches, because again, they're stuck in the narrative of, well, creatine's only for the elite of the elite athletes. And, I remember my mum when I was a rugby player and I got sent home in an academy at 16 with a bag of creatine. She thought I had steroids. She was like, why is the club giving you steroids? Made me bin it. It's going to stunt your growth. It's going to cause liver failure. It's going to cause hair loss. Thankfully, all of those research papers have been debunked and we realised that there's no real truth in it.
Yeah.
But again, looking at the youth sphere and then looking at the elderly population, there is some early studies to suggest that it can support with early onset of Alzheimer's and dementia. Now, again, early findings, we're not at a point where we can absolutely say that is the case.
Yeah.
But ultimately, those kind of, powerful studies that are coming out can really support the use of creatine widespread. And that's where the food first but not food only approach can come into play. Because yes, we need to be doing this alongside a healthy nutritional strategy or diet, whatever you want to call it. But at the same time, we can add that in to supplement a good diet. One thing I think we're struggling with at the moment in the industry is the quick fixes that you mentioned.
Correct.
So many people go, creatine's good for me. I see it all over social media. Dan's talking about it. Steve Jennings is talking about it. Somebody was on, one of a podcast talking about it the other day that I heard. I'm going to start taking that. but I'm still having McDonald's for breakfast, a Domino's for lunch, and a KFC for tea. But don't worry, because I'm having my creatine and I'm feeling
dude,
great.
This fucking creatine is not working for me.
Yeah. Exactly. And then when you go and dig deep into the research, you realise that, actually, a lot of the studies and the facts around it are done with people that are eating a generally healthy diet, is typically what they'll coin it as, or they'll be eating a standardised nutrition approach, and they wonder why it's not working for them. And it's like, well, maybe if we, started with the food first and then added that in once we'd managed to nail those habits and key behaviours around nutrition, then we might see the benefits.
Yeah, and I've always told this, having so many people work for me as trainers in the past, one of the things I used to tell guys is that, please tell your clients you can't out-train a bad diet.
Yes.
There's fucking no way in the world.
Still the case.
Yeah. That thing is never going to change. People just don't understand the concept of calories and how difficult it is to burn them. Yeah. It's very easy to get calories in, but it's very difficult to get them out.
Yes.
And I remember this discussion with, the founder of CureFit in India is a guy called Mukesh Bansal, and we were having a conversation, and he said that, and made a very good point. He said, when somebody is, when you start training and you start understanding calories, literally start understanding calories, not from what energy, but how you burn them, and then you suddenly look at a burger and say, this says 600 calories, says, that's fucking more than an hour on the treadmill.
Yeah.
And you say, that's a lot of shit. I'm not having that.
Yeah.
And that stayed with me. This was a conversation almost 8-9 years back. That has still stayed with me. And it's so true that when you start understanding and educating people. So I think this education bit of it. So I think step one is educating our trainers,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Which is what you're doing when you go for this your PT. So, as an operator, let's say I have a question for you. And I'm talking genuinely as, me as an operator, when I operated gyms. Most of my trainers are not qualified nutritionists, yes. Right? They don't want to spend the time, money, and then that's not where their heart lies. But they always struggle because people ask them, what should I eat? And like I said, you can't out-train a bad diet.
Yeah.
And if you don't allow these trainers to give people basic understanding of nutrition, they're not going to get the kind of results. They can just tell people what they need to do. So if you were to design something for the industry, say example, I'm a gym chain, and I come to you and I say, I've got a couple of 100 trainers who work for me. I want them to have basic understanding of nutrition so that they can speak the same language with the clients without being prescriptive.
Yes.
What should we do?
Yeah, so I think this might be a little bit controversial. I think the current nutrition courses are too high level knowledge. I don't think personal trainers need to understand, the difference between monosaccharides and disaccharides, or, different types of fats and different types of proteins and branched chain amino acids and essential amino acids and, all the high level stuff. Because as a personal trainer, you need to be good at what you do, which is training clients and motivating clients to do the right thing. And for me, if we can take and coin what they do, the motivational aspect of it, and tie it into some really simple nutrition CPD or course that they can then go back and really confidently deliver, then we're on to a winner. I think at the moment, I speak to a lot of personal trainers, like you say, when I'm at Level Up or when I'm at Perform X or when I'm working with your PT, I speak to a lot of really, really good trainers. But the knowledge that they have is really good if you're going to write a textbook on nutrition. It's really poor if you're going to deliver that to a client. A client doesn't really even need to know what, a carbohydrate is. They need to know that chips aren't the best type of carbohydrate for energy, and rice is probably a little bit better. Going whole grain is going to be more beneficial than sticking with your white or your other based carbohydrates. Similarly with protein, red meats, yes, has its time and a place, but eating red meat every day isn't going to be beneficial versus diversifying our protein intake, not just getting it from animal protein, but beans, pulses, lentils. So for me, if I was to, rip everything up and start again in the nutrition, personal training industry, I would create a course that ultimately teaches personal trainers how to deliver simple but effective nutrition support without them having to have all the knowledge. They've got all the knowledge on training. And to be honest, with the way that the world's going with AI and being able to Google everything, if there's a high level question that you need support with, there needs to be somebody potentially like myself as a qualified nutritionist that can help that personal trainer to overcome that barrier. But the likelihood is most clients just need habits, behaviors, and a little bit of nutritional support, maybe around periodizing their nutrition or talking around, kind of, I suppose, terminology like calorie banking. things like that. I'm not a huge fan of in sport, but when it comes to individuals who binge on a weekend, how do we manage that? Okay, we might calorie bank a little bit. If we're looking at somebody who literally forgets to have breakfast every other day.
What's calorie banking?
So calorie banking would be, for example, across the week, Monday through to Friday, we maybe reduce our calories by 100 calories. So it doesn't have a massive, profound effect on weight loss or weight maintenance. What we're doing there with those 5 days is banking 500 calories, essentially.
So you're a 500, you're 500 minus.
You're minus 500
right.
when you get to Friday, which then means if you're going to go out for a big meal and a load of drinks, you've kind of... the science isn't quite, there in terms of the research, but it's a nice, simple concept to think about. Reducing the week, go hard on the weekend. Similarly, I talk a lot, especially to personal trainers, about the 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time, eat all the best foods that you possibly can. And they can take this away, personal trainers or operators, and say, right, personal trainers, this is all I want you to tell your clients for the next week. 80% of the time, listen to me talking about good, healthy, whole meal, organic, fresh foods. 20% of the time, go and do what you want with your nutrition. Go and have that meal out with the friends and family and kids. Yeah. Go and have, a couple of drinks at the pub and watch the football. Go and eat a chocolate bar, but only make sure that creeps into your routine in the week 20% of the time. And if we can nail that, we're going to get a lot better results than trying to set out specific calorie tracked meal plans, or then, blowing our clients' heads off by being able to talk about, all the different types and strains of carbohydrates and talking around how they affect our glucose and our insulin levels differently and things like that. Like, great that you've got that knowledge, but most clients just need to be set an 80-20 rule and maybe 3 habits.
And this is the problem I see with personal trainers. And I used to tell this to my trainers sometimes. The philosophy is very simple. If you can't convince them, confuse them. So throw so much shit at them that they'll say, yeah, dude, you know more than me. Tell me what should I do.
Yeah.
But that's not the way to do it. I think you spoke about something like going in the evening, for dinner or lunch and carrying your, lunch box. It's fucking insane.
It's weird.
But it's weird. And I mean, you would... And then you can't incorporate this in your lifestyle forever.
No.
Right? And that's the challenge. If you can't sustain it over a period of time, it's going to be like what you said. These are like yo-yo diets. You just go on, I'm going to go on a keto diet, I'm going to go this diet, I'm going to go that diet, and it just doesn't end anywhere, because you constantly changing. You need to look at how you are as an individual, what your lifestyle is. Based on that, decide what kind of food you can eat, what times you can eat at. I mean, there's no such thing. Like, people ask me, what's better, to train in the morning or in the evening? Doesn't matter. Whenever you can fucking train, it's just get that fucking training hour in. And food-wise, like you mentioned, people don't need to know all the details. If they know basic fundamentals, especially for you, it's very difficult, because if I were to pick up a few things from elite athletes and how you give them nutrition plans, these guys are fucking traveling. Yes. They're in hotels. Yeah. So imagine, I'm in hotel for 5 days, so I'm going to have 5 days worth of meal prep. You can't fucking work like that, can you? So tell me, how do you work when you're away from home, going for matches? How do your players manage? How do you make sure that these people are able to perform in terms of, obviously, the sport is the other part of it, but their nutrition is on point.
Yeah.
And they're optimal position to play the way they're supposed to play.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Elite athletes get it really easy when it comes to nutrition, because they'll often have traveling chefs or pre-planned meals within their routine. So we try and take the thought process away, but still allow them the choice and the flexibility to create plates that work for them. Again, me setting out that they need to have X amount of carbohydrates, fats and proteins within one individual meal of the day is not going to be beneficial for them, because they've got all the other days and all the other meals where they might need to potentially have different foods, or they might have different, lifestyle choices, different food choices. So if we've got a traveling team, and this probably relates quite well to like busy professionals, that go to the gym regularly, but then might have a week away abroad or a week away, down south if they're from up north, or vice versa, it's all about planning and preparation. And again, having those non-negotiables of nutrition. So if you know full well that you're living by the 80-20 rule, you're not going to go down to the bar at the Premier Inn and order 5 beers and sit there and have a pack of Nobby's nuts and, a bag of ready salted Walker's crisps and a chocolate bar for your evening meal because But ultimately you're gonna go and you maybe look for a restaurant that's probably quite a sensible choice, something like a Nando's, where you go, right, I can get my chicken, I can potentially manage my carbohydrate intake because if I get a wrap, I know my carbs are within the wrap. But if I'm just going to get plain chicken or a butterfly chicken breast, I can get some rice on the side, and then I can order, a bunch of veg because Dan's told me that veg is important for recovery, and I'm on a recovery day. Okay, I'm going to get a corn on the cob, I'm going to get some minted peas, and I'm also going to get some tender stem broccoli. You can tell I've used Nando's quite a bit for my travel and trips with athletes. But again,
we've done Nando's quite a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And it's having that flexibility and freedom that elite athletes need, because when they are away and they are traveling, again, a lot of food is buffet style. So I know full well, and I have ultimate trust in a lot of my athletes, that if they're at a buffet style meal, because again, you can't be plating up 45 meals for athletes on an away trip every single day. They're going up to the counter and they've got a visual in their head of what their plate's going to look like. So before they've even read the menu, they're thinking, okay, I'm on a -1, which is the day before a match. Dan's told me I need to go high in carbs, which means 2 fistfuls of carbs on my plate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get up to that buffet counter. I'm going to identify where the carbohydrates are, and I'm going to put 50% of that on my plate. The rest of the plate can be made up of protein and veg. Or it might then be the flip side of it. I've just finished a match. I'm away in France, for example. I know that I've got a post-match meal at the club that I've just played at. I'm going to have a look at the buffet options. I know I only need 1 fistful of carbs because I've just finished playing to refuel. The rest of my plate needs to be made up of protein and vegetables. So the key then is 50% of my plate needs to be made of veg. So they go into those meals not with, I need 125 grams of peas, 40 grams of protein made up of chicken and lentils. They're not going in with these nuances that I suppose personal trainers get taught in the courses. They're going in with a visual in their head. So when they look down at their plate,
it's not complicated.
No, what they're seeing is essentially a good meal without having to take the scales in. I always say, watch any of the insider training videos on YouTube of any of the big clubs in the Premier League, and when you see them eating food at the training ground, what you don't notice is a player's not there with the scales and putting his plate on it and measuring out each portion of every single dish. It's a buffet style where often they don't even serve themselves. They walk up, they give the plate to the chef, and the chef throws all the food on and sends them away. Watch any, English, American team when they're operating within a club canteen. You'd think that would be where a nutritionist could control the most variables, because they could stand there and weigh out everything, but they don't, because we need autonomy from athletes. And similarly, in the personal training industry, we don't want to spend a lot of time on doing nutrition. Yes, it's a USP for a lot of personal trainers. Yes, it's something that you can add as an additional service, potentially even a little bit more financially supportive if you're a good nutritionist alongside being a good personal trainer. But ultimately, you want to spend as little time as possible on that, because your main goal is to train these individuals. That's what you got into the industry for.
Yeah, and you can't control it because, and this is where I think education comes in, which is where, I want to take a step back from where you're recommending to the to the players. Is your first sales pitch to tell people the importance of nutrition? Because you always say this, the difference, there's 1% difference between being professional and making it really big, and nutrition is a big part of that. That's going to be the difference between you're playing and you're getting injured, or there are so many things. How does this first conversation with people, who just become an elite athlete, how do you go about it? Because we can learn a lot from that when we speak to our clients.
Definitely. I think we can throw all the stats and numbers out there. A classic one is when we're talking hydration and an athlete doesn't value hydration. There's been shown in a lot of research studies, especially in cycling, that a 2% drop in body weight from sweat in a session can result in a 13% deficit in performance.
Wow.
And yes, I can use all the stats in the world, but ultimately, if you think about nutrition and you talk about nutrition and then you realize how much time you spend eating in the day, how much time you spend thinking about food in the day, it's one of the most important factors, not just generally in terms of day-to-day life, but to get the most out of their performance. I've seen athletes fail because they haven't put any attention into their nutrition. or they've chosen bad lifestyle habits that hinder their nutrition, whether that be drinking late nights, whether that be not going after, specific carbs on specific days, not recovering properly or hitting their protein targets, not potentially being protective over the types of foods and avoiding ultra processed foods. I've seen athletes ruin their career from it. But similarly, I've seen athletes which have not been given an opportunity or a shot by a coach or a chance to go on and develop as an individual, whether that be in rugby, football, and they've dialed into everything. They've dialed into nutrition. They've set themselves some non-negotiables. They've gone after getting a psychologist to support their mental aspect of performing and competing. They've looked at all of those individual processes and dialed in at 100% on all of them. And they've gone on to be one of the best players, that you could ever imagine. And sometimes you get coaches going, how on earth have they managed to go on and perform at that level? When we had them, we were ready to get rid of them or sell them or, tell them they're not going to be a footballer or a rugby player or a tennis player ever again. And all of a sudden now they're flying. And it's not that they've just hit a little bit of a purple patch in form or skill or performance. They've realised that when it comes to being an athlete, the wraparound pieces of that is probably the biggest work-ons. Most athletes get to where they are because they're skillful within their sport. Yeah. I wasn't a good enough rugby player to play at a pro level, but ultimately, if I was, I still might not make it if I don't do all the things around it. And I'm not just saying nutrition, I'm talking strength and conditioning, I'm talking, nutrition, psychology, physiology, all of those aspects. If we can dial in on them as an athlete, ultimately we're leaving no stone unturned. So my big motivational sales pitch to any athlete when I'm speaking to them is like, let's leave no stone unturned. Let's ensure that nutrition isn't the reason you don't make it as an athlete, because I do not want that on my conscience, and I don't want you thinking bad about me. And there's some athletes that have held their hand up and gone, you know what, Dan, I've not listened to you enough, and nutrition is probably one of the causes I've not made it. And there's other athletes that, as they're departing from a club I work at or an individual program that I've done with them, are thanking me saying, I don't think I'd have got to this level without nutrition. And that's powerful for me, because that means I'm doing a good job and I'm servicing athletes well. And again, there's no meal plans in sight. It's all habits, it's all behaviours, it's all periodisation. It's all making sure that they're eating the right stuff on the right day so they can perform the best, but also looking at the recovery and the health and the reduction of injury, the reduction of illnesses, all comes into play with becoming an athlete. Last thing on that is, I talk around athlete availability a lot. I think I've mentioned it in talks and podcasts in the past. If we are in a low energy availability state, one of the biggest things that gives way is our athlete availability. Now, we know from the stats and the research across any sport, the more times you are available to train, compete, perform, the further you're going to go in your career. An athlete that's riddled with illness and injury is ultimately never going to reach their potential because they miss blocks within their career where they can kick on and develop. So when we look at low energy availability, i.e. not eating enough food of the right types of foods to perform at their best, we see not just a reduced athlete availability, but an increased risk factor to injury, a decreased recovery response, difficulty with motivation, concentration, earlier fatigue. All of those factors, to me, are just negatives around them being the best performer in the world when it comes to their sport. So I think it's so important that when we are looking at nutrition, we bring those words and those conversations into play early on, because we're not just trying to make somebody better, we're trying to avoid the worst case scenario as well.
And what do you think we can do? Like, this is a lot of information. And if I were to look at, trying to map this into the fitness industry and say, I'm a personal trainer and the elite athlete is actually a client. So he's not an elite athlete, but he's a client and he wants to do this. So I am here in the gym. I am paying for this membership. I am paying for the personal training. So I really want to do this. I really want to achieve this. So that battle is already won.
Yeah.
As a personal trainer, what do I do now? And for my client, and B, for myself, so that I can get the client the right kind of results. Yeah. So what can I pick from this?
Yeah, I think rip up every nutrition plan you've ever wrote as a PT. First and foremost, anything that's got tracked calories on or specific meals that clients have to eat on specific days, rip it up. That's the first. Step one is get rid of what you've done in the past. Step two is build a system. Build a nutrition system that can never fail. So have a conversation with your client. Now, that could be a sit-down conversation over a coffee. That might potentially be whilst training on the gym floor, and ask what they want from a nutrition perspective. Now, every client, because they want the most value for money to an extent, will say, I need a meal plan. I need a tracked plan, because they want you to do loads of work to make it feel like they've got something that's really personal and individualized. But start swaying away from that. Say, like, I'm not a personal trainer like the rest of them that will do that. Something I want to do is make sure this is sustainable, a word that you've alluded to a lot within this podcast already, a sustainable strategy, not a diet, not a plan, a strategy that is sustainable. So that might be starting really basic with habit stacking. So I always think about Lego bricks where we stack them on top of each other. Pick 3 key habits that you know are going to directly impact your client's goals. Now, typically with nutrition, weight loss comes into play. So we know when it comes to weight loss and the type of weight that we lose, sleep is one of the biggest derivatives of that. You know, somebody who's having a lack of sleep potentially loses more muscle than fat when they're in a calorie deficit. So it might not even be nutrition directly related with these habits. It might be minimum quantity of sleep per night, 8 hours. That would be habit 1. Habit 2 might be 3 meals per day consisting of a plate of thirds. Third carbohydrates, third protein, a third fruit and veg. Keeping it super simple. And then the third one might be something around, you know, hydration. It might be a minimum of 2 litres of water per day. And then you can have coffees and teas alongside that, but a minimum of 2 litres of water per day. Those can be the first fundamental habits that a personal trainer can pass on to the client. And every time you check in, whether it's once, twice, 3 times a week, how are we getting on with the habits? Okay, we need more support with the 3 meals a day. I'm going to send you a visual on WhatsApp of how this plate should look. I tell you what, one better than that, send me back a picture of how that plate looks. And if you want to go a little bit further as a personal trainer, it might be as simple as taking that picture and just drawing the thirds on it for them and say, look at that, perfect plate, well done. We'll use that as an example for you going forward as a good meal. Now show me what you're eating tomorrow. Okay, right, we're having a burrito. Yeah, I can't see the thirds in that, but I know you've got loads of veg in there. I know you've got some rice, you've got some wraps, you've got some chicken. Right, we're nailing it, well done. It might be, okay, I'm struggling to do the 2 litres of water a day. I'm going to set you out a water timeline, not to follow like gospelly, but to make sure that you've got something as a visual to work from. 500 ml of water when we wake up in the morning. As soon as we wake up, that glass of water's on the side and we're drinking it. With our breakfast, we're having another 250 mils of water. Already before we've left the house, we've done 750 mils. Then at lunch, we're going to have another 500 ml bottle. We might be in work from lunch to dinner. We're going to have another 500 ml bottle during that period of time. I'm losing my maths here, but I think I've got about 250 mils left to drink. And then when we get home that evening, with our evening meal, we're going to have 250 mils of water. And setting that out on a timeline that's visual. And again, these are the individualized bits that you could provide to a client. And I'm not saying we have to make a brand new timeline for each client, but ultimately that's what makes it feel personal as a nutrition strategy.
So you call it a personal trainer?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think people don't understand it. So I think habit formation or habits are undermined, right? People
100%.
People feel that, like a lot of people ask me, Samir, you know so many nutritionists. Can you get me a, diet plan? I said, you know what? You can go to ChatGPT, get a diet plan.
Yes. Yeah.
The problem is not the diet plan. The problem is fucking following it.
Yes.
So if it's not something that you can do every day, and if it's not a part of your habit, like a habit formation, like you said, how the fuck is having a morning coffee a habit? Nobody's forced you for that. But now that it is your habit, the moment you wake up, the first thing you want is your coffee.
Yes.
So it's a habit and it becomes easy to work around it. So like you said, when people start looking at their nutrition plan as not as a chore, but more as, a basic, guide to this is how I should eat, right? So, is it 2 meals a day, 3 meals a day? How many liters of water a day? Basic fundamentals of the building blocks. A normal dude who's a working professional, somebody who's a mom at home, they can work with it. They can live with it. And it's not very difficult. Yeah. The problem is not the diet. The problem is the habit formation.
Yes.
How do you get around that? And how do I, as a personal trainer, this is a challenge I've always, seen in the industry. See, personal training, typically you're doing like at max 12 sessions a month. So you're seeing a person once in 48 hours.
Yeah.
That's the best case scenario.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's 2 sessions a week, sometimes 1 session a week. So you hardly get to fucking see the person.
Yeah.
How do you control their habits and what do you tell them?
Yeah. I think again, best case scenario, you're seeing somebody every 48 hours, which is perfect, but that's not the case for most people. Let's be realistic. That's a golden goose if you're a personal trainer in that regard. If somebody wants to see you that much, ultimately it might be once a week. You know, realistically, at best, it's going to be twice a week.
Correct.
So it's making sure that within that session, first and foremost, you're having those conversations around those habits, and any additional support you can provide is key. And putting onus on them and responsibility on them as an individual. Like, it's the same with training. You know, I years ago used to be a personal trainer, and this is where, you know, we've spoke about this many a times before. And I used to always say to my clients, I can only control what you're doing in the gym when you're in front of me. I can't control whether you come in on a Friday night or a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning. That's on you. Like, I'm here to set the program and set the plan so it's enjoyable and effective. Similar with nutrition. I can't be round at your house every evening feeding you your meal and making sure that you're eating the right foods and going, here comes the choo-choo train, and throwing food into the mouth. Like, it's not going to happen. No. So you need to be honest with me. Ultimately, for first and foremost, if these habits aren't working and we're struggling, we need to pivot. We need to find another way of getting them to work. You mentioned the morning coffee. It's a classic one. It's pairing habits together. So like, when we go back to hydration, morning coffee, okay, no problem, but have 500 ml of water before you have that coffee. As that kettle's boiling, as that Nespresso machine's pouring the coffee, I want you to drink 500 ml of water. You know, okay, we don't have a morning coffee. Before you brush your teeth, I want you to have 500 ml, because I'd like to think everybody's brushing the teeth in the morning. Before you go to bed, I'd like you to have 500 ml of water before you brush your teeth. You know, little moments in the day, getting on the tube for work. Okay, take a bottle of water.
That's a very good idea. You pivot on other habits. That's a fucking good idea.
Pairing.
You said pairing, right?
Pairing. And again, pivoting to the words and the terminology you're using. So you might be saying to somebody, you need 2 litres of water a day. And again, this is where I get really careful, because most athletes I work with understand millilitres and litres in terms of what they need to have. Some people might just want to know how many glasses they need a day. I own 5 pint glasses in my flat. How many pint glasses is it? Well, a pint glass is just over 500 ml. So realistically, if you're going to have it in pint glasses, you need probably 4 pint glasses of water. Right, got you. That makes sense. Because they might, bless them, might be weighing it out into jugs, working out how many mil of water I've had, because it's too scientific. And this is the world we're in, is people need information, simply put. Not okay, 2 to 3 litres of water a day, because that's just becomes too sciencey for some people. Most people get it. But this is where, as a personal trainer, you've got to use your personal skills, your people skills, and go, right, why is this habit not sticking? Is it because we're not pairing it with other habits? Or is it the fact that it's overcomplicated? You know, a classic one I've seen people try to do is, I want you to eat 7 grams per kilogram of body weight of carbohydrates in the day.
Right there, I've lost the battle here.
And they're going, right, so I've now got to do my own maths on my weight. Do I need to weigh myself every day to work out how much that is? In what meals do I need to have it in? No. All you need to say to them is, I want you to have a fistful of carbohydrates in every meal that you have. If that volume of carbs isn't on your plate, or more than that, you're over consuming or you're under consuming. Keep it as simple as using things of visuals, and then send them a visual afterwards. Here's the plate I want you to follow every meal. Send me back a picture of the plate. If you want to make it look fancy and push it all into the corners and the sections of the plate and send it back to me, brilliant. If you just dump it on your plate as one big mess, not a problem either. As long as you've measured that out using visuals, a palm's worth of protein, a thumb size worth of fat, is the best way of going about it. And again, simplifying those habits to the point at which it is quite literally drink 4 pint glasses of water a day.
Dan, let's look at some of the things that are happening in the industry, in the nutrition world.
Yes.
Right. I know for a fact that you don't endorse any nutrition brands. You're anti-supplement, if I were to say, and unless it's required, you should not be having it. I think it's maybe anti-supplement is the wrong term, but what I mean is you're not somebody who's pushing supplements down people's throats because somebody's paying you to do that. So I know you don't do that. Now, tell me the top 5 nutrition myths that are supplement related that you hear in the market at the moment.
Absolutely. I think going back to what you're saying around working with supplement brands, I have a very specific, clear objective whenever I'm working with a supplement brand is I'm here to educate your audience, educate your customer base. And ultimately, that's more important for me than pushing the product itself. And if that education leads to somebody making the rationale that they potentially need that product because they've got the knowledge now, then we're on to a winner.
Yeah.
But also equally, if somebody has the education and realises, I might as well be food first here, I don't need that product.
That decision tree that you spoke about.
That's a win as well, because then you're not having somebody take your product that doesn't need it. So then I always talk to a lot of supplement brands around like supplement waste, I call it, because I'm like, some supplement companies are brilliant. They'll only sell to the customers that need it. But there's companies out there that want to sell to the masses. And I call it supplement waste, because quite literally people will be taking these supplements and either urinating or going to the toilet.
Branch in amino acids, that's one for you.
Straight out and back into the toilet. And I'm like, it's a waste on the industry. You know, we talk about food waste. Let's talk about supplement waste. Like, if our body's not absorbing it or it doesn't need it, you're just basically giving them a product for it to go straight back through the other end. Yeah. And it's just one of the most expensive toilet trips that they've ever had in the world, literally. So, yeah, going back to myths, I think one of the biggest myths, first and foremost, just to throw this one out there, is that everybody needs supplements. That is such a myth. And I see it so much. A lot of companies will take research papers and manipulate what's being said around those research papers to suit their audience, or even funding their own research so they can then use stats and behaviours to then give them the opportunity to leverage that into marketing, which I think is such a dangerous game, one, for the supplement brand itself, and two, for the consumers, because they're believing backed by research supplements. The second myth for me is that all supplements are safe. Now, yes, supplement safety's got a lot better. Back in 2014, there was a research paper done which showed that around 18% of supplements in the UK contain prohibited or contaminated substances that would get an athlete banned from their sport. Now, that's what, 2 in 10. Right. Now it's probably a little bit better. There's not been a paper to update that, but it's probably about 1 in 10. So 1 in 10 supplements that sit on a supermarket shelf have contaminants and prohibited substances that would get an athlete banned from sport. Let that sink in. Do we really, even as individuals that aren't elite athletes, want to be putting something in our body that's banning professional sport? Probably not. So that's 1 in 10. Then you've also got the risk factor of that if it's not certified or Informed Sport approved in the UK, or like, you know, kind of I've got a seal of approval, you're then running the risk even further that more of those batches of those products could be contaminated. So that's probably myth number 2, is that all supplements are safe. I think the third one for me is then probably looking a little bit deeper into supplement structure. So there's been a couple of companies that have been called out around this recently. I'll withhold from naming the companies because I don't want to get in any legal trouble. But there was let's say a collective of protein brands that were found to have dangerous levels of lead and arsenic in their products. The articles that were shared ultimately, you know, hit the press, which is always a good thing, because it shows that just because you're taking a protein product doesn't necessarily mean it's safe. And that's probably one of the most safest, backed by research products we have. Similarly, there was a creatine, or a few creatine gummy brands that ultimately was found to have little to no creatine within their products. And that's quite a concern, because some people will be paying £30 plus for 30 creatine gummies, and actually all they were eating was expensive Haribos. So they think they're having creatine, and, you know, that's so one of the biggest myths, I think, is that all supplement companies tell the truth. That is a myth. A lot of them lie, or in the case of some of the products of these gummy companies, what came out in the press after, they were unaware of the manufacturing process that was going on in a different country overseas that then resulted in them not having any creatine in the product. They confidently came out to the press and said, we were sending the creatine and the gummy mix over there for them to create the gummies. The manufacturer was choosing not to put the creatine in the gummies. So again, it's who to trust in the industry. I think it's really important. So that's 4, I think, myths so far. And then I just think the final myth for me really is that you don't need a supplement stack. You know, there's all this chat around having a vitamin and mineral stack. Realistically, most people, through good nutrition, eating over 5 fruit and veg a day, do not need any vitamins and minerals, barring maybe vitamin D, because we get it through sunlight. You know, calcium-based, you know, supplements, or magnesium or iron, all of that stuff, unless prescribed by a dietitian, nutritionist or doctor, is likely going to have little to no benefit to you, because often, for example, magnesium's a great shout. I've mentioned magnesium biglycinate around how it helps with sleep. And, there's various strains of magnesium. The cheapest form of magnesium typically is magnesium oxide. Magnesium oxide has very little research to suggest that it helps with sleep. But you'll get a lot of companies that won't read that deep into the strain of magnesium. So what they'll do is they'll share the fact that they've got a sleep stack that contains magnesium. But then when you read deeper, the magnesium is magnesium oxide. It's not magnesium triglycinate or biglycinate, which is going to help with sleep. Magnesium oxide is good for digestive function, i.e. helping us digest foods better, which then can potentially have a knock-on effect to better sleep because our body's not digesting as hard in our sleep state phases. However, not a sleep product. So again, the final one for me is that get away from this whole supplement stack. I think the less supplements somebody can take, the better would be my kind of final point on the myths. After nailing 5 myths is less supplements, the better. The more food first you can be, the less risk factor you've got of contaminants, the less chance you've got of being dragged into a marketing scheme or a ploy from a company, the less money you'll most likely spend, and the more healthy and prosperous your life will be from that perspective.
Before we end, anything do you think we missed out on which is important?
I'd say potentially looking a little bit deeper into, I suppose, some of the other aspects of nutrition would be the only bit I'd talk about. So, we've spoke about sleep. Sleep isn't nutrition, but nutrition directly impacts sleep. And I think, especially for personal trainers, looking at that as as a wider question, as what are some of the other areas that a personal trainer can support?
And I think you've got a good cue. You spoke about magnesium now, so I can talk about sleep.
Yeah, go on, fire it. Are we cropping it?
Yeah, we'll cut it out.
That's fine. I didn't know whether I was still trying to be podcasting.
No, fuck it.
Fire into stuff like sleep, hydration, and overall wellness. I think is probably a question you can lead in with.
Okay. Dan, you made a very important point around magnesium. I think sleep has become the buzzword in the industry at the moment. A lot of people speak about sleep and the quality of sleep, and with all these fucking variables you're seeing, my sleep quality was good, bad, ugly. I actually don't like these variables. A lot of them are, it's good to know where you are, but if you get kind of obsessed with them, it's a problem. But sleep is important. Hydration is important. We spoke about that. As an overall all-encompassing, factor in our lifestyle, where do you put these in the life of a personal trainer and for their clients?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I have to probably give a little bit of credit to two of our industry friends, Ollie Patrick and Phil Learney, and the kind of the conversations they have with personal trainers around being a well-being specialist. I think ultimately nutrition falls into that well-being category.
Correct.
And I think when we speak so heavily on nutrition, because I am a nutritionist, so obviously this whole podcast has been centered around nutrition and those conversations, we can't disregard things such as hydration, sleep, and overall well-being. And I think, without them, we're not going to see the success in nutrition. We spoke earlier a little bit about sleep and body fat and how we can lose more muscle than overall fat if we don't sleep well enough. But sleep is a massive derivative of being able to follow the habits that we speak about. So we have to nail sleep first. Hydration, another one that ultimately, we're getting sold in the supplement industry, all of these electrolytes for every day. But actually, unless we're doing a highly intense session where we're losing salts, we don't need to replace what's lost through sweating with electrolytes. Water's good enough. But similarly, I think it's so important that for personal trainers, don't often use the word nutrition. And I know that seems weird coming from a nutritionist, but talk about it as being well-being or holistic approach to life, or give it a word that means more than just nutrition. Because if you coin yourself as a personal trainer and nutritionist, ultimately you're setting yourself out of stall to only talk about the stuff that you learn in your course. Whereas actually the majority of what you're going to speak about is well-being based habits, sleep in terms of making sure that they're sleeping 8 hours a night or more if they need it, because that's going to be one of the biggest derivatives of getting the most out of their activity, their routine and their habits, and then potentially looking at some of the other well-being factors like vitamins and minerals that we spoke about. So I think the final thing for me really on that is just as a personal trainer, as much as this episode may have inspired you to want to go and understand nutrition more or understand how to apply it more, again, not just being knowledge rich, but also being application rich as well instead of application poor. Ultimately, set your stall out as somebody that deals with well-being, because nutrition falls perfectly into that category of well-being. That then means you've got that standpoint of that people aren't expecting grams per kilograms or, calorie tracked meal plans, because you're not a nutritionist, you're a wellbeing specialist. And a wellbeing specialist can ultimately give you those tools and those fundamentals to talk about nutrition in confidence when speaking about habits, sustainability, whilst wrapping around some of all that other stuff around stretching, mobility, fitness, training, sleep, hydration, vitamins and minerals, all of those aspects as well. So I think my final message would be position yourself well as a personal trainer when it comes to tackling nutrition.
Last question from my side, Dan. I think it's been a great experience, like speaking with you. A lot of things that we speak about, informally, but then this has put some structure to it. And you've worked with teams like Man City, Leeds United, Warrington Bulls. You work with England cycling, and across age groups, like from under 19s, 9-year-olds, 21-year-olds, elite athletes all across. One of the points that you spoke about is habit formation. Now, obviously, the ability to form a habit at different ages is different, because you've had, sometimes you had baggage, and obviously athletes understand, at least they're told that nutrition is important or overall well-being is important for you to perform well.
Yeah.
But, to take a leaf out of, being a nutritionist for elite athletes, and as a personal trainer, I deal with very different kind of clientele. I deal with people, who've had, almost like their habits have been formed. They're in their 30s, 40s, 50s. It's very difficult to change. They're not in that frame of mind where they know they're going for an elite sport, so they don't understand the importance of nutrition. They just feel, like you said, you just move, you should get your steps in. There are lots of these myths around. Like, one of the myths I always say is, people say, oh, this 10,000 step. I don't know, fucking it's important, not important. Is there research done on it? But people think, oh, you should do 10,000 steps a day, and that's like the holy grail of, whatever movement. I don't know if it is or it isn't. I don't have any comments on that, or I have no opinion on that. But when it comes to habit formation, which is probably one of the most difficult parts for nutritionists, or for personal trainers outside of elite sport, right? How have you dealt with different age groups, categories, and how have you tweaked your approach to them?
Yeah, I think without trying to come up with something on the spot that fits the personal training world, I'll just run off what, ultimately me as a performance nutritionist would use, and you could change some of the terminology and the words. But I always say, first and foremost, before you get into any habit formation around nutrition, know the individual to start with. That's rule number one. You have to have a good understanding of the individual themselves.
Which means their lifestyle and everything.
Everything. Their lifestyle, their previous experience with personal trainers or nutritionists, their background, whether it's, related to sport, whether it's related to a lifestyle of inactivity for a personal trainer. So important to understand the individual. Then in, I suppose, performance nutrition in the elite world is know the sport. So secondly, know the sport. So like for me, I've worked in a variety of sports, and I still do. And I get asked often, really often, like, how are you able to, master the nutrition knowledge of each sport? I spend a lot of time in the car, and I spend a lot of time listening to podcasts, reading research papers, understanding the sport, not just from a nutrition point of view, but the demands physiologically, the nuances around the sport of sometimes I'll be training at 5 a.m. in the morning, other times I'll be training at 10 p.m. So knowing their sport can then obviously help to identify some of the other nuances that they might have within their individual lives. And then the final part then is understanding the nutrition. So the way I work is in a little bit of like a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Stage 1 is understanding the individual. Like you mentioned, all that lifestyle stuff. It's the big bottom of the pyramid almost, if you think about it. It's, training age, training knowledge, nutrition knowledge, all of that kind of stuff that a personal trainer needs to know. And this isn't a questionnaire or a PARQ form.
It's a conversation.
It's a conversation.
Yeah.
There might be notes made afterwards, but it's a face-to-face conversation to really get to know that individual. And again, like you say, there might be 50, there might be 15, there might be, for me, under 9s players, and I'm chatting with the parents, and I'm getting to know the individual athlete through the parents themselves of how I can help and support the parents. And then when it comes to the sport, for personal trainers, might look a little bit different. That might be subbed out for knowing their exercise level. Have they done personal training before? Have they done high rocks? Have they done CrossFit? Have they run an Ironman in the past? Have they, done a marathon? Have they been super fit or played a, sport at a high level in the past, but they've let everything go? Understand where they're coming from background-wise. And again, this is a conversation. This isn't a movement assessment screening. I know the classic personal trainer kind of tick box of what we need to do as an induction. These are conversations, not specific tests that we can put into processes. This is an open and honest conversation with our client. And then finally, understanding their nutrition. One, we want to know their knowledge, because I'm sure there's some people that have some terrible myths that need debunking early on to make sure they're doing the right things. And number two, we need to know all the bits that associate around nutrition. In the PerformX talk, I spoke about the COM-B model. So capability, opportunity, motivation, which drives behavior. We need to make sure we understand that individual's capability of nutrition, their opportunity, and their motivation around nutrition. It might be they have all three of them, in which case we've got a golden goose of a client, because we can use that to our advantage to get them doing the things that we want around nutrition. It might be that they have the capability, so they've got the facilities in their flat or their house to cook. They've got the time to cook. They've got the knowledge to cook. But then actually the opportunity might not be there in terms of maybe they're always ordering takeaways. The habit that they're in is, let's see what's on Uber Eats or Deliveroo. So we need to fix that. We need to get them doing good meals from home, because we know we've got the time and the equipment to do it. But the motivation might be there, which is perfect. It might be that they have the capability, they have the opportunity, but they just can't be asked. They haven't got the motivation. Then we've got to use our personal training skills, like we do in a session, to motivate them to do one more rep, to motivate them as to why nutrition's important. And all of that, if we can nail those three, will drive behaviors. And that's when I talk about understanding nutrition or understanding the individual's nutrition. Take them through a conversation around the COM-B model and start to work out where are the barriers and where are the enablers, as we call them. So the barriers might be, like I say, time. It might be lack of knowledge of cooking. It might be boredom around nutrition. So ultimately, let's give them those kind of key elements, those 3 steps, to really kind of go after it. And again, I suppose I've kind of just created, whilst chatting, a system that any personal trainer could write that down.
And now the system belongs to me.
That's it. And Samir Kapoor is now going to sell that for $49.99 per month on a monthly subscription. But that could be a really, really simple system. Yeah. Somebody with a notebook listening to this podcast or watching it on a small clip can ultimately write this down or save this video for later, because that could be the difference between a good personal trainer with high quality nutrition delivery or a good personal trainer with poor application to nutrition.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dan. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. Thank you very much.